Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Party leaders are meeting Theresa May following the allegations of sexual misconduct in Parliament. The Prime Minister has called for a new culture of respect, saying people should know their complaints will be investigated properly. Several Conservative and Labour MPs have been accused of inappropriate behaviour. This report from our political editor, Laura Kuhnsberg, contains some flashing images.
Something must be done. A cry heard often enough. But can the political leaders gathering tonight all agree what that something is? The Prime Minister happens to be in charge when long-held concerns have exploded. But earlier, she made clear she believes it's a moment for change.
This isn't about prying into private lives. What we are talking about is the use and abuse of power. We must stand up for all the victims of abuse, harassment or discrimination, wherever it has occurred.
Can you say, hand on heart, that you were not aware of any of the concerns that have emerged in the last couple of weeks?
Obviously, what has happened is over the last week, a number of stories have appeared in the press. A number of issues were raised with me that didn't appear in the press. And as you've seen, action has been taken.
Her number two is one of those being investigated.
Stand down while you're investigating this.
Damien Green vehemently denies claims there was porn on his computer years ago, or that he acted inappropriately with a young woman. In a separate case, another young activist has told the BBC she was raped by someone who worked for a Tory MP. She's desperately worried about the Westminster culture.
I've lost count of the number of women that I have seen plied with drunk to the point that they couldn't stand up and then being escorted out of bars by senior staffers and MPs. I've lost count and people don't bat an eyelid. Women are meat. It's a new intern, new meat.
The CPS dropped her case, but there's been confusion about whether ministers were aware. The Leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom, first said she didn't know, but subsequently admitted that concerns had been raised.
This place has some fine traditions, but also a habit of keeping secrets within its panelled walls when things go wrong. Every party now agrees the solution must be outside the system. But what or who? That's not quite clear.
Every party leader has turned up to the table tonight, but will this be a rare moment when they all can join together? At least they do agree that Westminster's culture cannot stay the same. Laura Kuhnsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
In a political system that seems increasingly tribal, it is sometimes only a national crisis that can bring our party leaders together. Now, whatever you may choose to call it, the allegations of harassment sweeping through Westminster certainly do pose an existential threat to the reputation of our politics. So perhaps it was not surprising to see all sides on the same stage today, trying to work out what to do about it. With so much at stake, perhaps even the stability of the government, they did agree on new safeguards to protect everyone working in Parliament.
This was a once-in-a-blue-moon meeting. The main political party leaders all in a room together seeking a way to contain the Westminster abuse crisis. The Prime Minister stressing afterwards that she is on the side of the victims.
I think if this hasn't happened to you, it's difficult to appreciate the impact that being a victim of this sort of behaviour can have. It simply has a lasting impact on people, and we need to do more to stop these abuses of power.
Mrs May has faced questions about whether she knew about some of the abuse allegations before the most recent revelations. She says not.
The allegations that have come to the fore in the last week, I've been made aware of over that time period because of things that have appeared in the press, but also allegations that I've been told over the last week in private. Action has been taken with a number of Conservative members of Parliament.
That includes an investigation into her own right-hand man, Damien Green. He's now been accused of having pornography on an office computer some years ago, as well as inappropriate behaviour towards a female journalist. He denies all the claims. Mr Green is one of 8 Conservative MPs facing accusations about past behaviour. Today, the Liberal Democrats said they too had suspended a party member and referred allegations to the police. And 3 Labour MPs and a member of the Welsh Assembly also face allegations. So this evening, the party leaders said they were setting up an independent grievance process, better human resources support and a cross-party working group to get things moving. In short, this crisis is now so serious, they've started agreeing with one another. The question is whether it will hold.
Well, I think the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating here. We've agreed to meet, we've agreed to set up this urgent group to represent all staff who work in this building. It's not just MPs and their staff, it's also employees of political parties, it's cleaners, it's catering workers.
But one thing separates MPs from the others: they can't be fired.
Some of the stuff that's been going on in Parliament, if those people were working in other workplaces, they would be out. And if they worked for me and I employed them, they would be out. Should be the same here.
So there may still be arguments about whether the new grievance system is tough enough, as well as questions not just about who did what to whom, but also who knew about it and did nothing. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Westminster.
Every party leader in Westminster sat around the table in the Prime Minister's Commons office this afternoon. An extraordinary meeting called by Theresa May to agree a new independent grievance procedure to tackle claims of sexual harassment in Parliament. Mrs May called it an important step forward, whilst Jeremy Corbyn said the scandal should mark a moment of real change across society. Paul McNamara is in Westminster now. Paul, the latest?
Well, apparently, John, we've had that rarest of thing in politics, a relatively short meeting where everyone actually agreed with each other to a few pre-arranged points. Those points are a new in-house HR service, a new independent grievance service, and a cross-party working group made up of 2 members from the Conservatives, 2 members from Labour, a Lib Dem, Plaid Cymru, and all the other parties. Of course, what that doesn't address is what happens to allegations that are already out there and how they'll be dealt with. And as we'll see from this report, there are many. The list of MPs being investigated for alleged inappropriate behaviour is a growing one. In little over a week, it's now more than 10 from both sides of the House of Commons. Their alleged behaviour today being discussed by their leaders. Whether it was the subject matter being debated or the rarity of all party leaders sat round the table in the Prime Minister's private office, nobody looked comfortable.
We need to do more to stop these abuses of power, and I'm pleased that having convened this meeting of party leaders today, we have agreed a way forward. We are going to ensure that there's an upgrade to the existing phone line for staff, so that staff in future will be able to get face-to-face HR support, and for that to be in place by the end of the month. And we've also agreed that we need a completely new grievance procedure for staff working here, for everybody working here, and that should come into effect in the new year. So I think an important step forward has been taken today. It's important that we get this right, and I'm sorry that we have seen these abuses of power, too many, taking place over too many years, and the fact that they've taken place here at our seat of democracy should be a matter of shame for us all.
Leaving his house to the rapid fire of camera shutters before heading to Parliament to face an onslaught of questions by the Cabinet Office today, Damien Green, the de facto Deputy PM, is accused of making a sexual advance to an activist. And when his office was raided here in 2008 for an investigation into Home Office leaks...
This is currently a scene that we're going to search, and it's not appropriate that you be in here.
Porn was allegedly discovered on his computer. Mr Green strenuously denies all the allegations, but this is the scandal the figures at the very top of Theresa May's government are embroiled.
I'm extremely appalled.
8 Conservative politicians are currently being investigated, including this man, Daniel Kaczynski. Over the weekend, this programme revealed he faces allegations of pressuring a young researcher to go on a date with a much older associate from overseas. He strongly denies the accusation, saying he only asked the researcher to have a coffee with a friend. but he's under investigation by the Conservative disciplinary panel. Labour MPs are being investigated too. Talking to business leaders today, though, Jeremy Corbyn said this isn't just a cross-party issue, but one across the whole of society.
All of us need to look hard at ourselves, as we in the Labour Party are doing, to see how our processes and procedures can be improved, how it can be made easier for women to speak out and for victims to get the support they have a right to expect.
All the party leaders agree change is needed for the future. The question still, though, what did happen in the past? And are there any more letters of resignation to be written?
Well, with me now, Dame Anne Leslie, veteran foreign correspondent, journalist and columnist for the Daily Mail, Kat Barnyard, feminist author and co-founder of the education pressure group UK Feminista, and Dr. Joanna Williams, author of Women versus Feminism. Kat Barnyard, we've seen allegations that range from touching a knee to rape. Are they all part of the same line of behaviour?
Well, we know that violence against women exists on a continuum, from sexual harassment, as you say, to more serious and extreme violations. What underpins it all is an inequality of power between women and men, and various other cultural trends linked to that. So the toxic cultural current, which has existed for hundreds of years, that teaches boys and men that they are entitled to sexually access women's bodies regardless of whether the feeling is mutual. Now, all of these discussions about sexual harassment and sexism in Parliament, in wider society, this is not somehow incidental to politics. This is not an add-on. This is a very stuff of politics. This is about who holds power in society. And in this case, it's about men's power in a society which is still deeply sexist.
Dame Anne Leslie, I mean, you must have seen some appalling behaviour over the years.
Oh, my goodness, yes. I mean, this is patter cake, that's going on now. It's ridiculous. I mean, when I was young, which is a very long time ago, every man in my office assumed that I was young and pretty, which is unbelievable, but I was, that I would welcome his stupid jokes and, touching me up and things. And of course I didn't. And after a while, I got so angry. I was a terrible smoker in those days that I actually stubbed out a fag on one of these people's arm. But the worst one was when I was very young. The first time I did any questions, which is live. And I'm there, sitting next to one of the panellists, who was a man called Sir Nicholas Fairbairn, who was Solicitor General in Scotland. And I suddenly realised that he had his hand up my crotch. And the question was something to do with, I don't know what it was. Now, I was so furious, but also scared, because, if I said what I would say to him, sort of 2 or 3 years later, if you do that again, I will tell Jonathan Dimbleby, who is that I can't answer any question until Sir Nicholas takes his hand out of my crotch. I didn't say it, but I always wished I had done. However, what I don't like about what's going on now is feminists have been trying all the time to say, oh, my goodness, women must be empowered. They must be strong. They will be strong. Women... And they seem to spend their time now saying that women are traumatised because some silly old drunk in Parliament put his hand on her knee or anything like that. You can't have it both ways. You can't say women are strong and empowered and then say, they're scared and they're going to cry and all that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, I should say Nicholas Fairbairn is dead, so isn't here to defend himself from your allegation. But I mean, Kat Barnyard, I mean, what do you make of what Anne Leslie is saying? I mean, do you feel that belittles in any way what's going on?
Well, I think it shows just how much courage that the women and girls reporting sexual harassment have when, on countless discussions on national TV and in the media, this issue is still trivialised and dismissed, when we know actually that sexual harassment is a routine, everyday experience for very many women and girls.
Joanna Williams, you have a different perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to take issue, first of all, with the idea that these women are brave. I mean, to have lunch with someone in a very posh restaurant and discuss the state of politics is not in any way the equivalent of working down a coal mine or even working as a single mum, as a cleaner. You know, these are, and when these women come out and tell their stories about somebody may or may not have touched their knee 15 years ago, they receive a round of applause.
So you're not very sympathetic to them?
I'm not sympathetic. I actually think it's really offensive to women who have been raped that we discuss knee touching in the same breath as rape. I think that's hugely offensive.
Well, I mean, that's where I started this, isn't it? Is it all part of the same line of behaviour?
Well, we know that violence against women exists on a continuum and it's underpinned by the same sexist attitudes and inequalities of power in our society. And we have to address it all. It's not one or the other.
You see, I would take issue with that.
Yeah.
I really don't think that these things are on a continuum, and I think the suggestion that they are actually demeans women and belittles women. Women do know the difference between being raped.
Yes, I mean, you're agreeing.
Most of my career has actually been foreign corresponding. So I know the bad condition, the horrible condition of most of the women in the countries that I was working in. And if I said to them, you know, now in England, if any man does this to you, you should scream and say, rape coming up. I wouldn't insult them.
But they don't, do they? I mean, people don't scream and say rape. They say, stop treating me like a sexual object or an object or...
No, not in the places. Wars, for example. If you know, the number of wars I've done, and I'm sure you have too, women do not say, oh, stop it, he's trying to rape.
But why don't you aspire to live in a society where people just treat each other with respect?
Well, of course, but don't be so silly.
But you're excusing a lot of this behaviour, is what I'm saying.
No, I'm not excusing it at all, but I'm just saying, you know, proportion. We must have a sense of proportion.
I think it's really possible to criticise these things from, and I think Anne's example of stubbing out a cigarette on someone is wonderful, and I think it's possible to deal with these things.
But not everybody's that brave, are they?
Well, I mean, you don't have to be so brave to...
You've got to be pretty brave to... That's a violent act. He could have been hit.
Next month, the UK Feminist Minister and the National Education Union are releasing a report which surveys students and teachers up and down the country about sexism in schools. And what it finds is that sexual harassment is rife in schools. And not only that, but young girls are learning that society just turns a blind eye and, in fact, brushes it off, as has happened in this conversation. Now, what that means is that it goes unaddressed and it just is allowed to perpetuate. We have to bring about change, and that means at every level. It means we have to continue the conversation, speaking out against sexual harassment, but we need to act on every level. Government, Ofsted, teacher training institutions and individual schools, so that we can make change for a new generation where girls are not subject to routine sexual harassment.
Nowadays is that sexual harassment is being defined so broadly. Yeah. There was a statistic released last week that showed that 28% of 18 to 24-year-olds think that winking is a form of sexual harassment. Now, to me, that's utterly tragic. What we're teaching young girls...
Can you see no circumstance under which winking could be sexual harassment?
Absolutely not. You can ignore winking, or you can be flattered and you can actually enjoy being winked at. I do not see any circumstance under which winking is sexual harassment. It demeans and trivialises sexual harassment.
A leery teacher winking at a 15-year-old girl?
Winking is subjective. It's how you choose to interpret it. I think what's a problem is that we teach young girls to see themselves as victims, and that's tragic.
Apart from anything else about women, what is worrying me now is young men. Because young men in this country, white men, boys, they're not doing very well in schools. The women are beating them. They're not doing very well in jobs, ditto. And you're constantly telling young men that, you know, you are scum because you are so sexist and horrible and everything. And, you know, they are quite delicate creatures, men. And I think the net result is that they turn away into themselves and, you know, they will say, well, you don't want anything to do with me, do you? And they will use violence, because one of the things that really is difficult for young men is to read messages properly. And I think it's going to be very dangerous because young men are the biggest problem we have now in schools and in everything else.
Do you know what? I think despite some of the minimisation, women and girls will continue to speak out against sexual harassment, and despite the naysayers, they will change the world.
I'm sorry we're out of time, but thank you all very much indeed for coming in.